Hey, Brett. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Kelly. How are you?
I am so good. I am at the 𝗀𝗲𝗀𝘀 Digital Drive office today. They have an event tonight, and that I'm on a panel related to AI. So they were very kind to give me the space to use for our conversation. So thank you to 𝗀𝗲 Digital Drive.
Very
How are
good.
you doing?
I'm great. Good afternoon, everyone. I always like to thank everybody for investing their time. I always say that's our most precious commodity, and you're investing it in us, and really more importantly, you're investing it in yourself. So I comment that virtually all the books, not virtually, but literally all the books that I read are a function of somebody that's referred them to me, either a colleague or they're referenced another book I've read. And recall that last month we were able to host Mark Mears, love that guy, and he had this great track record, this great career in food service and leadership, and he happened to work for a guy named Dave Novak. For those of you who may or may not know him, this is the book that I read this month called How Leaders Learn. Dave Novak is a fascinating guy. His last professional stop was CEO of Yum Brands, which is Pizza Hut and Kentucky Fried Chicken, and then Taco Bell. So I work in the food service vertical. So obviously I was very attracted to that book and then all that Mark had to offer. So that was really interesting. I'm also just finishing I'll probably finish it this weekend actually, Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights. A little bit of a departure from who I am in terms of political leanings, but what a fascinating guy that is, and some of the things he's done and how he's lived his life. So really kind of enjoying that, and just kind of a little bit of a departure from what I normally cover. So my point in bringing all that up is, I keep no less than 10 books in the queue. I know Kelly's probably got more than that. And I just roll right from one book into the next. So I'm not a big TV person, not a big podcast person other than this one, of course, but I just encourage our listeners to adopt that really good habit of reading, whatever attracts you. So this month, we're covering The Journey of Leadership. That's this one here. And it's a great book done by McKinsey from the Bauer Forum, if you're familiar with that. But McKinsey's one of these great think tanks, if you will, kind of in that same category as BCG, Boston Capital, and then Bain. But if you're familiar with the World Economic Forum, which goes by Davos, this is kind of a little bit different version of that. But you can't help but be impressed by everything that McKinsey's done. And recall, I looked this up actually. Kelly and I covered CEO Excellence in November of 22, if you remember that, Kelly. And that's considered kind of a foundational book in the McKinsey library. So turn it back over to you, Kel.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into this. I was excited, especially lately, that McKinsey realizes the importance of leadership with a heart and love, like we talked about last month with Mark. And that's not what they're known for however 100 years or however old they are. So
exactly 100 years they are. That's a good point.
Yeah. So even they're talking about it. This book is The Journey of Leadership: How CEOs Learn to Lead from the Inside Out, and not only about the financials. They share a lot of data. They share stories from about 25 current and former CEOs. And they're stories that I hadn't heard before, and I read all the things, so it's really good insight. And I'm really excited to dive in. Should we just dive in?
Well, one other point here, Marvin Bower, who's one of the McKinsey's global partners, he was quoted in the book, and I love this, said, and I think of it all the time, right? Because I make the comment to people in what I've come and what I've become and what I am today. I say, you can't go to college and take a course for this. You learn it by 30 years of experience and building relationships and all of those types of things. But his quote that I thought was so timely, he said, the only training for being a CEO is being a CEO. And that's really true. And McKinsey does a lot of work, and they're focused, most of their content is targeted at that audience, right? Their work, again, CEO Excellence. This is largely devoted to CEOs. So that's just the crowd and the circles that they run in. So yeah, great book, as you talked about. The other part I wanted to add, each month as we're preparing, I'm always visualizing, who am I speaking to, right? What's our audience? And I've talked often about my two daughters that are 25 and 27, and they're both in industry now. And am I speaking to them in this book, or am I speaking to CEOs? Who am I actually speaking to? And like I said, this is mostly about CEOs, just as we covered in CEO Excellence. So not necessarily speaking to my daughters the way I do often, but more speaking to those senior level managers or even C-suite executives that already have, like I said, that C in their title, or upper level VPs.
And I was actually thinking too for the people that want to reach that level to have this glimpse into what it's like. That helps them be more prepared than the ones that told their stories in here. You know, that they didn't have any kind of training to get up there. And several of the topics that are in the book, we talked about in the MBA class. I just finished teaching at Rutgers on organization behavior. And we talked about several of the things in this book. I'm going to recommend it to that class. I'm going to send them a note. And then I'm in corporate social responsibility teaching that right now. So a few of those are in there. And then leadership in the summer is this might be the textbook for it. I have to decide. But yeah, it was, you know, it definitely crosses into that for people who report to those levels and people who aspire to be those levels.
So the book is broken down into two parts. The first part is really leading oneself, and the second part of the book is leading others. The way they break it down, they talk about leadership elements, and there are 6 elements related to self, and then there are 6 elements relating to others. So in the interest of time, we don't need to go through all of those, and I'm sure Kelly and I will kind of highlight the things that resonated with us. So keep in mind that McKinsey's got 3,000 partners. I didn't know that. I did a little bit of research on that, and 7,000 clients. So and Kelly did a great job of pointing it out. Most of what they publish is very data driven. It's very case study driven. But imagine being able to draw on the data from 7,000 clients and 3,000 partners and all the different experiences, engagements that they've had, mostly again at the CEO level. So they've got just reams and reams and volumes of data to be able to draw on as they assemble this. And this book, based on the way it was presented and positioned, is basically an extract of all of that learning. So you're getting kind of what I consider to be the best of the best of what McKinsey has to offer.
Yeah, I appreciated that too. And the insights from the Bauer Forum, because again, the CEOs told stories to these authors that they don't share with everybody. So getting that inside view and some great quotes and inspiration from all of them was really appreciated. And McKinsey works with the big, huge companies and at the C level, but they're very generous in sharing a lot of data and reports. And so they're one of my main sources. So I can use their data and supports as I serve mid-sized customers and mid-sized clients and the founders, owners, and CEOs of those and the leadership team. So I appreciate it.
I'm curious, you got McKinsey. I'm going to guess because I know I use Harvard Business Review a lot. Do you refer to that also? Yeah, those
That's
two.
like my Bible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I started reading that in the Wall Street Journal in undergrad. And I'm pretty sure the Wall Street Journal I've read, I bet I could maybe count on 2 hands the number of days I haven't read that since undergrad. And it's so much easier with the app. But continued learning was one of their main things that they pushed. And we can circle back to that a little bit later.
Absolutely.
Want to dive into the first?
I think of this as, data mining for the best possible CEO data that's ever been assembled.
Yeah, right on.
You want to dive in first? Which one really stood out to you?
Let's dive into the first half of the starts with you stuff. Comments, anything that stood out?
Yeah,
I have all my tabs and I have 2 pieces of notes that I hand wrote too.
There you go. Nice job.
I did not expect that.
Yeah, I went right to chapter 1. So, and that one was, you're not the smartest person in the room, and they use the element, and that's the term they use, humility, and speaks to knowing others, and more importantly, recognizing that we don't have to have all the answers, nor are we really expected to. So you think about high-performing leaders building teams that fill the gaps in an organization, so everything that the team needs is met, and it's not all necessarily needing to come from that one CEO. So case in point, and I'm using myself, most of what I always share is about stories. I'm likely the most non-tech person, Kelly, you're ever going to meet.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I'm good at applications like Excel and PowerPoint and those types of things. But when it comes to things like hardware and switches and servers and security and gateways, that's just not my strength. And every organization has to have those things, right? They run on an ERP, they run on an OMS, they run on those things. So for a person at my level to really not have that as a strength, you really got to be very humble and say, look, I need somebody else on the organization to step up. So given the title, obviously a lot of people defer to me, particularly in the org chart, and it finally got where the IT guys, I just said, look, we need to make a change. And it's not easy to give up territory, right? To give up part of the org chart, but in the interest of delivering value to the team, we've said, you know what, we need to make a change. And I got to be honest with you, I'm a pretty smart guy, but I'm not even sure I could learn that if I wanted to. I certainly don't have time to dive into something that's native to what I do. But it's just one of those things that wasn't a strength. So obviously, humility and recognizing that I'm not the smartest person in the room makes us stronger as a team. So that was really the first part. The second part is identifying who on the team is better suited to that role, and then being humble enough to step back and say, you know what, you're better for this than I am, irrespective of place on the org chart and irrespective of title. So, that was the first thing that really kind of jumped out to me, and that really resonated with who I am and kind of how I go about my business.
Yeah, that's good. And that's one of the first mistakes they said that new CEOs make, is thinking that they have to have all the answers. And so they told a lot of stories where they don't. And being so long in my career, I kind of looked at that as like, oh, it's a relief. I don't have to be the smartest, because I know I'm not. I might be one of the most social, but I'm not the smartest.
Right.
My GPA was fine at the high 3.8 something, but I wasn't like off the charts and all of that. So it's kind of a relief. But and what something you brought up too, they talk a lot in the book about ego, and when you're ruminating about something, check your ego and see, am I upset about this, or am I confused about this because of how it's affecting my ego, or what's the best thing for the company? What's the best thing for the organization? That was one of the best, I thought, tips.
I even looked at it from the standpoint of diversity, where different people from different backgrounds, different ethnic groups, sex, creed, color, religion. I mean, they all bring a different perspective, and diversity creates a stronger team if as a leader we're willing to be open-minded about the value of diversity. So, and I don't know why I kept having this visualization in my head of 10 guys walking down the hall in the same blue suits, and they're all walking in lockstep with one another, and just thinking, yeah, they may look good, they may sound good, and they may dress good, but do they actually perform as well as some of the other teams? And there were several instances in the book that referenced, and I don't know why, but 𝗚𝗍𝗄𝗃 and Jack Welch, which, growing up as a young guy in the 80s and early 90s, everybody wanted to be Jack Welch then, but we can certainly see that how society and business has evolved today. Not so much today.
I think I've talked about him before, because I was the only person that I knew that did not admire him.
You have mentioned that. That's right.
I got kind of reamed. People owe me an apology now.
Exactly.
But
what was something that stuck out to you?
I can picture at an office back in the navy suits and the red tie or whatever. And people, if people just fall in line to the CEO, and the CEO doesn't reach out and connect with people and really get to know and create the safe environment for people to speak up, then they fall in line, and it's you're just not going to get you're not going to have creativity or innovation or speed of communication. So it really holds back if the CEO wants to have all the answers, or wants to be in control of everything too. I forgot which CEO was new, and he changed some of the practices that whatever had been done, now it had to go through him. And he realized pretty quickly that he made himself a roadblock. And, to realize it and then get back out is a good thing. So many things stood out to me. Stop trying to prove yourself kind of hit home. To me is something that, as a entrepreneur, and you're always trying to get clients and introduce other people to clients, I feel like I'm always trying to justify that I know what I'm talking about or how I could help someone. So it kind of resonated with me. Like, you don't have to prove anything all the time. You don't have to have that mindset. So that was one that stood out to me in that.
I grabbed this one, which Lynn Elsenhouse, which the case study was around. She's a former CEO of Sunoco, and she speaks to the importance of confidence. That was the element confidence. And her quote was, if you want to be a CEO, you need to take on the tough assignments, even if it means going backwards or possibly moving your family overseas. And, I'm fond of saying the job you're doing today is nothing more than a learning opportunity for the job you don't even know you'll have in the future. And for young people, that's a really, really hard thing to grasp, right? Confidence is a multifaceted element. It can go so many different ways. One stop in my career, the company that I was working with hadn't yet really developed their sales department, their sales verticals. And I was faced with doing what I do in food service, and they came to me and said, "Hey, we need someone to call on Walmart." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, Walmart, really?" And at the time, I was highly involved in food service and highly involved in value-added products, and that was really the avenue that we wanted to pursue with Walmart. For about a year, I was on the Walmart team, and my
Wow.
gosh, I learned so much. I was so out of my element. It was the classic imposter syndrome. But I just did the very best I could, and that's all I had to offer was the very best that I could, and it really worked out. And ultimately, the business came back and developed a true retail strategy and a true retail team. And I say then the professionals took over. But rather than saying no, I found a way to say yes. The second aspect of confidence, and we talked about it in our pre-read here a couple of minutes ago, is the idea of being curious, education and continual learning. So this idea of building confidence. And we say, how do we build confidence? We level the playing field by learning, right? By continually knowing everything we can about our business. The X's and O's, the numbers, that's one thing. But think about all of the skill sets that you don't have and how you tackle those gaps and deficiencies. We can get frustrated with those gaps. We can get frustrated with our own personal deficiencies, or we can be proactive and take on the opportunity to learn, whether it's financial knowledge, whether it's operations, sales, whatever the case may be. Case in point, and Kelly was my teacher. I went back to business school at the age of 49. And I often tell people, I was older than many of the professors that I had at the time, but I knew that financial knowledge and financial wherewithal was a gap. And the only way I was going to overcome that is I had to go out and learn it. I had to get educated, and I did. So, just as she suggested, Lynn being the she, take on those tough assignments, get the experience, complete the coursework, and as you're preparing yourself, it's not what's in front of you today that you're preparing for. You're preparing for opportunities that you don't even know that you're going to be given. So she put it this way: you're getting the building blocks of what the board is looking for in the next CEO.
Yeah, right on. I think that's what the professors talked with me about too in undergrad was, I was a history major and a business minor, but in those business classes, they talked about studying and just being curious and understanding business all the time. So then when you're in a conversation, like I read the Wall Street Journal so much, I think when I go in to meet with a company, there's probably more in my head than somebody who just Googled them yesterday.
Oh,
So that, and I have like CNBC, I watch that or have it on all the time. And I take a lunch break. That's what I watch, or in the early morning, that's what I turn on, and like just get soaking it up all the time before you need the information. That was the theme throughout the whole book, that leaders they create a plan, and then something happens and they have to divert. Well, how do you know what to divert, how to divert, or what to divert to, if you haven't been paying attention to things all the time?
right. Well, and think of the current event content that you're absorbing, the contemporary language, what's hot right now, where companies and CEOs are focused, what's going on in the economy, where consumers are spending their time and dollars. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Sometimes we can get a little bit oblivious to the world around us because we get so narrow-minded or go down a rabbit hole. I had a friend of mine who sent me a text a couple of days ago and said, "Hey, did you see what's going on in the college coaching ranks?" And I sent him back. I said, "LOL." I said, "I'm living under a rock. I've been working about 20 hours a day, 5 days a week, and trying to keep my business." I shouldn't say that. Keep my business is more than floating. It's on top of the water right now. I'm just trying to hang on to it. So it isn't a case of keeping it afloat. That's far from the truth. But my whole point yeah, unfortunately, I haven't had time to focus on college basketball right now.
Yeah. March Madness was one of the examples from Bob Chapman, I think. And he said that I think it was him, and he took over, and all the employees, they were watching March Madness, so they weren't really into the work. So then he created a March Madness theme. And if they reached certain numbers and whatever their jobs were, and then they did it and they won and gave prizes. And I remember one employee told them that she never thought she would hit that extra 2% or whatever the number was. She never thought it was possible until he challenged, and he just kind of made that up off the top of his head, till he challenged, and then she strived for that. Oh, this was the one to drive his car, I think, to drive his fancy truck or something. But then she won, and just what a difference that made to somebody to open their eyes and challenge and, try something different to get a different outcome.
Yeah, those are great points, and it certainly validates, that the journey of leadership is just a great treasure trove of kind of information and case studies. So, the
Yeah.
11th element is adopt fearless learning or practice making mistakes. They have a theme, and then they actually have the element. So, from the text, it says when people win, it's because they're not afraid to fail. They give it a shot. They show up and try something new. They're looking ahead, not back. And the element of adopting fearless learning, it requires flexibility, for teams to take risk and eventually fail, which nobody likes to fail, but it's part of the risk-taking process, and you need to learn from their mistakes and rapidly adjust. It's human nature to fall in love with a strategy or an idea. We were just talking about that in the business the other day,
Uh,
and where people are reluctant to course correct or admit failure and pull back from a strategy. We've got time, we've got effort, we've got energy, we're
mhm.
committed, right? And then we see if that initiative fails, we take that personally, and we see that as a failure on ourselves. Actually, it wasn't a failure; it was just not a win. So they quoted in a book, Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Jalen Hurts, and I love this. I'd never read it before, but he said, "We either win or we learn." And I thought, wow, that is really, really impactful, right? He never has a loss mindset or a lose mindset. We either win or we learn. And I just found that really, really powerful. I always take little nuggets from these books, and I'm
Yeah.
sure that's one of the nuggets that I'll take. And I kind of
And
tied that with,
the example in the book was from the when they played the Chiefs and
mhm,
didn't win,
yep,
but then
that's
a
right.
few years later they did. So they learned all right.
Yeah. I tied that, and you're a big fan of Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you
Yeah.
there. And it's that same mindset. So case in point, again, our current business has got some foundational components, purchasing, accounting, logistics, those kind of things that are just kind of native to a business. But in broadline food service, we weren't active in what we call trading or freight brokerage. And we took a risk by starting those initiatives literally from scratch, and then being able to report that both were really slowly gaining momentum, and you kept chugging away. Jim Collins uses the term flywheel effect. And sometimes you just got to get that flywheel started, and eventually it starts spinning faster and faster and faster. So, but the most important thing is to get started and,
Yeah.
and overcome this fear of failure. So, that's not to tell you that there weren't some really sleepless nights as we move through this whole process, and a lot of hours of reflection on my part saying, what, do we stay the course or do we pull the plug? Literally almost every day I was having that conversation. But I think we're out of the dark, and we're kind of under some smoother water right now. And just through a combination of goodwill and strategy and the perseverance, we're now starting to see those positive returns. So element 11 is about being fearless, and learning, and then practice by making mistakes, and both happen by doing. And that's the key word that I'm focusing on, is doing. We can talk about strategy, we can talk about PowerPoints, we can talk about theory, but eventually all those things got to end, and we close our book and somebody's got to go do something. And
Yeah.
that doing something, I always think of doing as being bold. I don't know if that's really true or not, but when somebody gets up out of their chair and goes and actually does something, they're being bold and they're being a doer. And just like Jalen Hurts, you're either going to win or you're going to learn, but something good is going to come out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on. And the you won't be paralyzed with fear if you've learned all along and paid attention all along. And
Hmm.
then you might have access to even more ideas. And so many examples of that in the book, more clever ideas, more creative and innovative ideas. And then you make the decision and set the strategy based on today's circumstances and what you can predict. So if you're paying attention, you probably can predict better than
Yep,
somebody who is just self-absorbed and focused only on their desk and what's in front of them. So that
absolutely.
seeing, they talked about the CEO's job is to see 5 years ahead. And I know 20 or 30 years ago it was to see 25 years ahead. So
Oh my.
yeah, the tech and society, everything has changed so much, but to see 5 years ahead and pay attention so you can predict that and create circumstances. But then stuff changes. And so I think that's what's part of the fun of business, is the game of it all. When based on everything I know right now, this is the best, but then things can change that you don't expect, and the impact something has on your company or on your customers, and then they have to change to adapt to something, and a supply chain issue lately, and price of fuel, so things can, the burnout of employees, burnout of managers, so many challenges leaders are facing right now that are causing strategies based on things that didn't consider any of that. it's causing those strategies to need to be addressed.
Well, and to your point, I mean, there's the geopolitical situation right now, and as it relates to trade, and so many businesses have some foot in the trade space, whether they realize it or not. A component that they're utilizing is imported, or something's involved there. But yeah, I'm heavily involved in all of that, and I literally there was a weekend where, and I can't remember where it was. President Trump was advocating. Oh, I know what it was. He was advocating for doubling the tariffs on product coming from Europe, and literally that was all that dominated the news for the entire weekend. And I'm sitting there calculating the impact of that potential. He ultimately rolled it back, and he didn't do it. But for an entire weekend, I'm sitting there calculating all the phone calls I'm going to have to make that following Monday to share with my customers what the impact of this trade decision is. And all of those things that are, to your point, in the Wall Street Journal, on CNBC, they impact real people. And I happen to be one of those real people, as well do you and all the consumers that are either buying at Walmart or shopping at a restaurant or whatever the case may be. Whether we realize it or not, all those headlines at some point reverberate down to us as consumers.
And they take that very seriously in the book too, about the CEO's role is responsibility for all of those people. And there's one of the, maybe it's number 10 or something, was on empathy. Oh, that was the last one. Number 12 was on empathy. Yeah. And so you have to realize how big the role is and the responsibilities, and care about the people. And people can tell if you care about them or not. Like you calling your customer, instead of just let them see it on the news or send an email to 40 people, so calling them, little things like that make a difference.
So anything else in the book you wanted to cover? I've got another topic I want to talk to you about, but want to make sure that we cover everything in the book that you had on your notes.
On my 10 pages, purpose, I loved that they talked about that. Oh, and then I think we've talked over the years about vulnerability is such a buzzword, and so they straighten that out in here too. I had an email about that earlier today. Inspiring boldness. The best leaders, the job is to put the right team in place, give them the tools they need, clear obstacles out of the way, and let them do it.
Yep.
So back to kind of what we talked about at the beginning, the CEO shouldn't be doing all the things and doesn't have to know all of that. And then assessing afterwards. And I loved or appreciated the example from the military, which I think that has been shared in some of our stuff, but they went into so much more detail about the Navy SEALs in 2011, I think it was. And so that example was good. Yeah, so let's dive into your thoughts. I think I'm good.
Yeah, well, I was reflecting this month, and we didn't talk about it at our open, but this might be 50. I don't know if it's 49 or 50.
51.
It's 51. Yeah. Yes, so this is 51 conversations, and all of these, and coach me here a little bit, but I think we've stayed relatively within the ditches, so to speak, on leadership, personal development, communication. I think that's, if you were to put a genre on what we've talked about, it largely falls under those key categories. And my reflection to myself as I was thinking about it was, what leaders are reading what are leaders reading today? And I said to myself, we've done 51 books. I think probably we're coming up on almost 5 years, I think. And are the books that we're covering what the leaders of today are covering, and what are they covering? And I started to kind of think about that. And if you don't specifically call the element noted in one case study, they reference it as hard skills. I mean, that's not anything that's new, right? Hard skills are accounting, finance, operations, and sales. Most of what we're talking about are the soft skills, right? So you say to yourself, if you have your eye on the C-suite, you have your eye on a business unit leader, division leader, that level of job, you say to yourself, and I always think about, why would somebody listen to our podcast? Because that's your goal, right? You have a goal or a target to get to that level, and you're expecting that something that we're going to share with you, either a book or a content or a concept, is going to somehow help you accelerate in your pursuit of that goal. And I'm completely on board with that. So I'm thinking to myself as I'm coaching, if I were a listener, what would I want to hear from Kelly? The first thing is, go deep and wide in your industry, right? And let's call that part of the hard skill concept. And I look back to my time when I first started out. literally that's the term I use, deep and wide. I studied the history of the industry. I studied the companies that were winners, the companies that were losers. I studied the CEOs. I mean, I literally read everything I could about my industry, to include the data points, the KPIs, what the finance people in all of the competitors, what they measured. I mean, I was a sponge on everything I could possibly learn about my industry. So we talk a lot about entrepreneurs, and I think we've talked in other broadcasts about me being part of 𝗀𝗄, and 𝗀𝗄 is Service Corps of Retired Executives, and it's entrepreneurial coaching. And one of the keys of entrepreneurs is, until you literally are thinking about your job, your company, your project 24/7, night and day, you're probably not as committed as you need to be. Entrepreneurs are fanatical about their companies and their projects and their concepts and what they're launching. If you work in a company, you maybe aren't quite as fanatical as Elon Musk or somebody like that. But my point is, dive into your industry, go deep and wide, learn, and this all speaks to what you should be reading, right? Learn the hard skills, the accounting, the finance, the operations, but become passionate about your industry. That's the first thing. The second thing is, consider those hard skills kind of as foundational, and that they complement the learning that we've just talked about today, the 12 skills, the 12 elements of leadership, the soft skills. So the text this month is really detailing all the methods, and we talked about this earlier, of 𝗚𝗍𝗂𝗃 and Jack Welch. And those are no longer effective in today's economy. You have to have the hard skills, the 𝗚𝗍𝗂𝗃, the Jack Welch skills. But today, as we talked about earlier, you've got to have the soft skills. So again, you need to study much of what Kelly and I have talked about over the last 51 broadcasts. So the other part of that, go ahead.
The research supports that too.
Yeah.
People are not leaving their jobs today because their boss doesn't know accounting. They're leaving their job because of the soft stuff, that the boss doesn't even know anything about them, doesn't have any compassion for their kid broke their leg and they need to leave early to go take care of it or whatever. That's what causes people to leave. So it's the soft skills, it turns out, are kind of hard, and they're the difference makers.
That's an interesting way to say it. The soft skills are kind of hard. But I think you're spot on, and your coaching to the listeners is to say, hey, you got to have a little bit of both, right? And you have to mix it up, and you know that you're never complete. We've talked a lot, I think it was in Mark Mears' book, a lot about being curious, even in your 60s and 70s. And I talked a little bit about my plaque that I have in the office about being 83 and I'm still learning. And that was Michelangelo who said that. So the last aspect that I noted here was what contemporary leaders are reading. And I think we can all agree it's all universal, right? What is the hottest topic right now to be reading about? Artificial intelligence. Kelly's on a board tonight about artificial intelligence. So my coaching.
I wrote a book about it, so people can read about it.
So if you're not reading about artificial intelligence, if you're not involved in it, if you're not studying it, right, there's a call out there. You probably should be reading something about artificial intelligence, because it's definitely the hot topic right now. So beyond that, it kind of varies, in my opinion, and I want Kelly's input here. Topics are geopolitics, the ever-changing consumer, probably wealth distribution. Those are some of the hot things right now. ESG, diversity. So my point in bringing that up is again, speaking to our listeners, if you're going to read, right, you got to read a little bit about the hard skills, you got to read a little bit about the soft skills, and then you got to read a little bit about what can be contemporary topics, i.e. artificial intelligence and some of the other things that I just mentioned. So give me some feedback on what you think of that reflection, and am I off base, Kelly, or can you get behind that, and are we aligned?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that the hard skills are foundational, hard skills, and then the soft ones. And I think once people become high performers and you're really talented and skilled, and that the book talks about this too, complacency sets in. And then new things are happening and you're not learning it. Or like this, the Generation Z, when they're coming up now, they're not the newest out of undergrad anymore. They're experienced and they're coming up. They have specific demands and needs that are different than Gen Y and Gen X and the boomers before. So you have to pay attention to what's going on. The Rockhurst University mission, where you went and where I teach in the MBA program, their mission says something about that we want to develop the leaders that are engaged in the complexities of the world. And we're not trying to create leaders that just sit back and cross their fingers and hope great things happen. The more you know, the more you can influence what happens. And we need leaders that are doing that. We need leaders that are caring enough to do that. And
well, if you remember my alumni testimonial, when I spoke in your class, one of the statements I made is when you graduate, the learning doesn't end. That's when it really starts.
yeah.
And those words didn't really mean much at the time, but they sure ring true now today.
And did you think that when you brought that box of 100 books into my classroom the year after you graduated, did you think, wow, this is going to turn into something all these years later? And here we are.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. So, you know, we mentioned our why in every conversation. We somehow work it in there some way. And early on, we were 4 or 5 broadcasts deep. And I think I said to Kelly, you know, why are we doing this? We got to figure out this, whether we need an anthem or a rally cry or just simply our, you know, the Simon Sinek why. And we got on a call separate and apart from our conversations, and we started to tease it out. And I'm really proud of this because I think it really resonates and it encapsulates really why we're here and what we're doing. And what we landed on was to inspire the leaders of tomorrow to invest in themselves today. And you know, I don't know how many words that is, 10 or so, but a very simple 10 words. But I think it really grabs the gist of why we've invested the hours in each other, why we've continued to do what we're doing. And I say it all the time, if we can inspire just one individual to pick up a book and spend the time investing in themselves, and somehow, some way, through that investment, they become a better version of themselves, we will have accomplished our goal.
And then they will make a difference to people. They will be able to influence even better than they would have without. And we're pretty picky when we pick books. We're pretty selective in the first place. And we've had a few over our years where we recommended them only to our moms or something like that.
Yeah, we're not batting 1,000, but we're close. Yeah.
Last question. So who would you recommend this book to, if anybody?
Yeah. So, you know, I asked that to when I get to every book, I ask, you know, would I recommend The Journey of Leadership? And my answer is, it depends. So it's certainly got value to the right audience. And obviously that's somewhat subjective. But as we noted at the open, you know, the McKinsey content largely targets senior leaders, and The Journey of Leadership certainly speaks to that very audience. So the value to middle managers on the fast track to senior roles, you know, recall that I reckon back, I was in the military, everybody knows that, but my time in the military, they used to instill this mindset. They called it 2 levels up. And that was like a catchphrase. And what that meant was in a battle, it's highly likely that you could be asked to operate 2 levels up from where you were. And as a little bit gruesome, but, you know, your leader could be taken out, and that leader could be taken out, where you're left to run the unit 2 levels up. So we were always expected to do that. So if you're one of those middle manager leaders and you're saying to yourself, hey, you know what, 2 levels up for me is a position that's in the C-suite, this is a book for you, 2 levels up. So, and again, to your point, if you're a junior leader or an early entrant or new to the industry, but you know what, you're starting to have aspirations and goals, and you'd like to maybe be a fast mover and climb that ladder quickly, you know, these skills are really what are going to round you out. To Kelly's point, you know, accounting, hard accounting, you know, finance, those things are only going to get you so far, and to get you to the level where you really probably ultimately want to aspire to or intend to go, you will need these skills. So that's my opinion. What about you, Kelly? Would you recommend it?
Same, for sure. It was the book was pretty easy to read. It wasn't the language and everything. The stories were really easy, and it's very practical. So I wasn't sure if it would be practical, but it is. And they give a list of 100 specific actions that they recommend in the back of the book. And so that's another resource for people. And then there's a reflection on the website. I've created those for the last several books. So voyagecg.com/leadership books. There's a reflection for you to reflect on what challenges you're facing right now, and then what you want to do about those. And then I think there's 5 or 6 questions from the book for you to think about. So you don't even have to have read the whole book to use the reflection and to think about it. And if you do the reflection, it might inspire you to want to read the book. So check out the reflection, and the ones for the past books are all posted there too on that page.
So Kelly, that's a wrap for the March one. We're off a date or off a week, which it's going to make for a short month next month, which is no problem. Tee us up, because I'm excited to know, what are we reading in April?
Yeah, this is actually the fourth Thursday is when we normally do it. We were going to go last week and then we went back. Next week, we are a week ahead, April 16th, and it's emotionally charged. And it's takes what we talked about today, I think, to another level. So we will dive into that. That one is not only for CEOs. So it is one that all of our people could benefit from listening to.
Well, hey, Kelly, good luck tonight on your panel, man. That's really an honor. I hope you have a great time, and I hope you have a good show up. So, knock them dead, as they say.
Yeah, they said it sold out. So, yeah, very excited for that. And I'll take off the banner. Yeah, it should be fun. I can see them all out here getting ready and setting up everything. So I have some time to wrap up this and get out there too. People will start coming at 5, so about 20 minutes. So,
well, to everybody that's on the call or listening afterwards, we make the statement all the time: invest in yourself. It's the best investment that you ever make. Warren Buffett likes to say that investing in yourself is something that can never be taken away from you. So it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. So have a fantastic month, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Again, The Journey of Leadership by McKinsey was this month's read, and looking forward to connecting with everybody again next month in April.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.